Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel, where today we are going to be doing my July wrap up. So we're going to talk about every book that I read in the month of July. And I had a fantastic reading month. I read so many things, actually to the point where I decided to go ahead and pull out my DNFs into its own separate video, in part because I actually did DNF like 6 books, but also because I read so many and I wanted to make sure that this video didn't get too long. Now I will, once that video is posted, I will leave a link down below in case you are interested. But let's go ahead and jump right in with the very first thing I finished, which was Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. Now this is an adult fantasy, and I guess it's going to be, I think it's the first in a series, but this is essentially a, this is, the way that I've heard it described is that it's a coffee shop AU where this guy just like inserted his D&D characters. And that is the best description ever. So basically, we have our main character of Viv, who is an orc barbarian, and she decides to stop being a mercenary part of this, like, you know, party and go open a coffee shop. But she's never done anything like this, so she has a lot of logistics to figure out. And that is the entire story. So here's the thing, like, I loved this. I really dug it. It is the tagline is a novel of high fantasy and low stakes, and that is perfect. If you have ever read fan fiction, especially coffee shop alternate universe fan fiction, then you're gonna know exactly what you're getting into. It's kind of slow and it has a very thin kind of plot because we're literally just following Viv as she is trying to figure out how to open up this coffee shop and make it work and like bring new things to her customers. But it is cozy and it's heartwarming and it's low stakes and it's just lovely. Sometimes you just want a book where it's not like life or death situations all the time. And so I did know going in that this is like described as a coffee shop AU, and I've read enough of those to kind of know what that means. So I really wasn't surprised walking into this when it like had a thin plot and it was just kind of slow. And I kind of also waited until I was in the mood for something like that. And because of that, I ended up really, really loving this. And I will say that if you think you want to read this, just go in knowing that it is slow. It has a kind of thin plot. That's just what this is going to be. But if you can be okay with that, it is a very it's a very well done version of that. So I ended up giving it 4.25 stars. And then I picked up Small Magics by Ilona Andrews. This is a bind up of short stories, 6 short stories. 4 are from the Kate Daniels universe, which is an urban fantasy series that Ilona Andrews has written. And then there are 2 short stories that I think are unaffiliated with any of the other worlds that they have written. I will say that of the short stories in this, I had already read 3 of them. I did reread them and I enjoyed them, but I kind of knew going into them that I was going to enjoy them. The 3 that I had not read was, there was one Kate Daniels story that Kate Daniels world story that I had not read before. We were actually following characters that like don't appear in the Kate Daniels books, which I thought was interesting, and I thought it was a good story. And I actually thought it also that it had one of the best descriptions of this world that I have seen in any of the Kate Daniels world stories or novels. So that was really cool. The 2 unaffiliated ones I thought were fine, but they weren't really for me because they were kind of romancy short stories, which like never works for me. I don't think I've ever read a short story or even a novella where I really truly believed it. No, actually I have read one, but like for the most part, they just don't work for me. It's too fast. I just don't have enough time to really get to know the characters and like them. So like, even though I didn't love them, it also wasn't for me. But overall, I think that this is really good. And I think that these stories add a lot, especially to the Kate Daniels world. However, I will say that a lot of them are online for free. So there is absolutely no reason to like pick this up in physical form unless you're like me and prefer physical form, would like to support the author, and like know you're going to reread it. But otherwise, like, yeah, I would recommend just looking up most of these and reading them for free on the internet. And then, I did give this bind up 3.75 stars. And then after that, I read the Tea Dragon Society, the Tea Dragon Festival, and the Tea Dragon Tapestry, all by Kay O'Neill. Now, this is a graphic novel series. It's intended for kids. It's a kids graphic novel series. And in this world, there are tea dragons, which are like little dragons who like grow tea leaves and twigs and things on predominantly on their horns, but there are other places as well. But they are like not really able to care for themselves, and so their owners have to care for them. Enter our main character for at least volumes 1 and 3, Greta. And Greta has been learning how to be a blacksmith, but she decides that she also wants to learn how to take care of these tea dragons. And in the second book, our main character is Rin, and Rin lives up in the mountains and discovers this actual full-grown dragon that has been asleep, that was supposed to be like watching over their village, but has been asleep for like 80 years and needs to learn more about the village and get integrated in. And you know, that story goes from there. And then this one comes back to Greta and her friend Minette, and Greta is trying to figure out how to balance learning how to be a blacksmith with taking care of a tea dragon, and Minette is trying to figure out how to balance her past with who she is in the present, I think is the best way to describe that. And the story goes from there. These are all lovely. They're a little bit simplistic, like the stories themselves are simplistic in a way that is befitting like kids books. Like I didn't have a problem with it because like these are intended for kids. So I totally got it. But they are a little bit simplistic, but it was still lovely. They had very great messages for kids that are reading this. They're just very sweet, very heartwarming. And then like the artwork within these is just, it's great. I thought that the artwork was just beautiful and just so well done. It's actually well done to the point that even though I had read the Tea Dragon Society before digitally, but when I saw it in my library and I actually picked it up and started flipping through it, I was like, oh no, this is actually a different experience in physical copy. So I went ahead and reread Tea Dragon Society and then picked up the other two. I ended up giving the Tea Dragon Society and the Tea Dragon Festival 4 stars, and then the Tea Dragon Tapestry was 4.25 stars. It ended this series in a very lovely way. And I really enjoyed this graphic novel series. And then after that, I went ahead and finished Nightmare Magazine special issue, People of Color Destroy Horror, guest edited by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. And so this is a collection of short stories, horror short stories. And as I am finding with when I'm picking up like Nightmare or Lightspeed or Fantasy, they're all sister publications. The quality of these stories are really, really good. But they're not all for me, which is to be expected with short story collections. But I'm really, really digging the quality of these because, like, there were none of these that I thought were actually bad. There were just a bunch that I'm like, it's not really my thing, which is great. I will say that there was one short story, like, there were a couple of them that I'm like, oh, I like these. And then there was one that I really loved, and that was A Diet of Worms by Valerie Valdez. It is fantastic. I loved it, which is great because I really want to read. There's a novel by Valerie Valdez that I was like, oh, I want to read that, called Chilling Effect. And so it was nice to see that actually I do like her writing. So that was lovely. And then there was one nonfiction essay that I really, really thought was well done, and that was The H Word, The Darkest, Truest Mirrors by Alyssa Wong. That was also really done really well. I really want to see if I can pick up any of their work. I think that Alyssa Wong mostly does shorts though, which can be a little bit more difficult to track down, but I'm actually like I really want to, because I thought that their nonfiction essay was delightful. And so, yeah, I thought that this was well done. I found some new authors to check out, which is about all I can ask for from a short story collection. So I ended up giving this 4 stars. And then I picked up The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, the first book in the Wayfarers series. And so this is an adult science fiction series, and in this one we are following our main character of Rosemary, who has just joined the crew of the Wayfarer. And like, it's a quirky kind of family situation, and she has to figure out how to integrate herself, but very quickly they decide to take on this very lucrative job, which is very lucrative because it's very dangerous. And so they have to kind of figure out how to band together to ensure their survival in this dangerous situation. And the story goes from there. And I thought that there was a lot of good happening. Like, the world building is great. I love that, this is called Hope Punk, and I really dig that. There are just no major problems. It's not like life and death situations here. And again, like Legends and Lattes, it's not life and death. Well, sort of. Like, the world itself, a lot of people's needs are met, and I really appreciate that. We're not in this dystopian, we're not in a capitalistic hell. It's just generally people are taken care of, which is really, really nice. I really actually also loved the variety and kinds of aliens that we had. I thought that that was absolutely well done. I loved the mix of characters that we got and how their personalities interacted on this spaceship. I think that the writing style is great, and the plot itself was fairly enjoyable. The biggest problem I had is that the first 100 page, like, the book overall is just generally pretty slow, but especially that first 100 pages was really slow, and there was no real hook. So there wasn't anything to really pull you in. You're just getting to know these characters, and they're interesting, but it didn't hook me. And so I was having to force myself to pick up this book for that first 100 pages. After that, I was invested enough in the characters that I was like wanting to pick up this book, and I very much enjoyed it. But that first 100 pages was a little bit rough for me personally, because like, I just didn't have anything that was pulling me in. So I still really, really liked it. I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. And then I went ahead and picked up What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat by Aubrey Gordon. And this is an adult nonfiction, and it's it's exactly what it sounds like. Aubrey Gordon is a fat woman, and she is also a fat justice activist. And she wrote this book to talk about like all these things that we just don't really discuss as a society, but are very evident to her as a very fat woman. And so I came to this because I actually listened to Aubrey Gordon's podcast, Maintenance Phase. Now, in this podcast with her co-host Michael Hobbs, they actually take on diet and diet culture and health and lifestyle, like all of the things around diet and health and trying to have a healthy lifestyle, and like really dives into the facts and like and exposes like where we as a society have really gotten it wrong. And so that's how I originally knew her. And then I heard that she had this book, and I was just like, yeah, I want to read it. And what I will say is, because I came to it through Maintenance Phase, the first 50 to 75-ish pages were kind of really boring, because a lot of the topics and information had actually been covered in episodes from the podcast in more in depth too. And so I was just like, yeah, I already know this. But I will say, after that 75-ish pages, we got to stuff that like hadn't been talked about in the podcast, and so it became a lot more interesting to me personally. I really did like the structure of this, the fact that it's very much a blend of memoir and like actually looking at studies and anecdotes and all of these kinds of things. So generally speaking, Aubrey would start a chapter with with her own personal experience of something, and then kind of transition into talking about, societal norms and bringing in anecdotes. And then very frequently she also brings in a ton of research that either is in support of what she's saying or like directly refuting what society says or any number of things. And I really, really like this structure. It worked really well for me. What didn't work well for me was actually the sentence structures. So like how sentences are put together. It's really normal for nonfiction, but it's a style that really doesn't work well for me. And so I had to reread sentences quite often to like make sure that I was taking in the information as it was being presented. So a little bit of a mixed bag, but a lot of that is because of like my own personal stuff rather than this being not good. So I still enjoyed it. I think it's a worthwhile read, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. And then after that, I finished A Red Rose Chain by Seanan McGuire. This is the 9th book in the October Day series, which is an adult urban fantasy series where we are following our main character of October Day. She is half human, half fae, and a knight in the fairy realms, and she is thrown at all the weird problems because she just ends up like solving all the weird problems. Like she just can handle it all. And in this book, the weird problem she's being thrown at is that a neighboring kingdom has declared war. And so Toby's queen has decided that Toby should be a diplomat and go to the other kingdom to try to prevent this war, which is, it's a choice because like Toby is not a diplomat. And so things go awry almost immediately. And the story goes from there. And this is one of those weird books where, again, there's so much that I love, and there's just a couple things that really, really are hard to deal with. So first of all, this is a reread, and that affects my enjoyment, but I love the world building in this. Like, again, this series in general, like we get so much great world building with every book, and this was no exception. I loved one of our characters in this. And my friend was just like, we just got introduced to this character like 2 books ago, and now I'm in a puddle of emotions over like what's happening in this book. And I'm like, yeah, that's what happens. It was great. I loved watching their transformation. I loved finding out more about them. And it was great. I love the fact that we are laying so many plot threads, which of course, like I can see because this is a reread. And we're developing a number of characters and the relationships within this world. And it's great. However, our main antagonist, I hate him. He is such a bigot and like such a well-written bigot that you're like, oh, yeah, I know this guy. I've run into this guy and I hate him. So I hated his face so much that like I didn't like reading the scenes where he appeared. I didn't like reading the scenes where like Toby and her retinue were trying to figure out how to deal with him. So like I didn't want to read like more than half of the book because like I just hated this character, which is like really great characterization, honestly, but like not really helpful if you want me to read the book. So that was not great. And then the other thing is that because Toby is a diplomat and she's supposed to be this diplomat, but she really doesn't know how to be a diplomat, we have set up this plot that I really don't like, which is where Toby is put in a situation where she doesn't know what she's doing. And so she can never form a plan of action because she doesn't know how to do that because she doesn't know what she's doing. And so she ends up just reacting to everything, which is just not my favorite kind of plot. So like, even though there's a lot of stuff going on in this book that is good, and it's really a great addition to the series, it's not my favorite book in this series because it's just very difficult for me to read. So I still gave it 4 stars because it is still really good, like for this series, but yeah, not my favorite. Yeah. And then after that, I picked up A Prayer for the Crown Shy by Becky Chambers. So this is the second book in the Monk and Robot series, and this is an adult science fiction novella series, and we're in the future where like robots gain sentience, and then they decided that they didn't want to work for the humans anymore. So they just like went off to the woods and were like, hey, we're going to go figure out how to be like, people, sort of. And we'll come back in a little bit though and check in on you and see if you need anything. In the first book, a robot comes out of the forest and asks our main character of Dex, what do you need? And then Dex has to figure out what exactly to do with this. In this book, they decide that what they're going to do with this is they're actually going to go around the various towns and ask people what they need, because Dex doesn't feel comfortable answering for the whole of humanity. But this is a question that Mosscap, the robot, is supposed to be trying to figure out an answer, like what the answer is. And so they go around asking everybody, and the story goes from there. And this is really just a continuation of the first novella. It's a very soft science fiction. It's hope punk again. It's actually literally a world where everybody's basic needs are met. And I adore that. Like, again, not having these life and death stakes was really, really nice. And so it was just kind of nice to be in this kind of world where like I don't have to have that anxiety of like, things could go horribly, horribly wrong. This is a series that is a lot about like exploration of self and self-discovery and figuring out how to be okay when like you have all your basic needs met, but you still feel like there's something missing. And so I really, really like that. And like, honestly, like this is something where I think a lot of millennials would really relate because the struggle is real. But I liked this. I thought it was a great addition to this series. I did think that with the first book, occasionally the commentary was a little bit pointed for my tastes. It didn't get in the way of the plot as much as I thought it did in the first one, but was still pretty pointed in a way that like, didn't quite work for me. But otherwise, I really liked this. I think it's just lovely. So I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. And then the last thing that I picked up, oh my goodness, I dropped them. Was Library Wars Love and War by Kuroyumi. It's actually adapted by Kuroyumi. It is originally by Hiro Arikawa. It's 15 volumes. I read 15 volumes, the entire manga series in the month of July. And basically, this manga series is about an alternate version of Japan where essentially the national government has decided that censorship is a good thing, has created the Media Betterment Committee to enforce censorship. But the local government, which is predominantly the libraries, is not on board with this. And so they actually are fighting against the national government and to like protect books. And because of the use of force to try to like take these books away so that people can't read them, the library actually has put together the Library Forces, which is a defense force. Enter our main character of Iku Kasahara, and she is a new recruit into the Library Library Defense Force. There you go. That's all 15 novels, all 15 volumes. But she has just been recruited to be part of the Library Forces. She is going through her training, and she is then pretty quickly in the first volume, she is the first woman to be chosen for the Library Defense Task Force, which is like the elite group for the Defense Force. And we are following along on her adventures with her new team and trying to fight against the censorship from the Media Betterment Committee. And this is a reread. This is the third time I've read this series, and I just really, really like it. It is, what's it called? Shoujo Beat. And so it is kind of like YA specifically aimed at girls, right? It has a romance story in it. Like it's very YA in ways that I'm like generally don't always love, but it was okay in these books because they were just really fun. I love the premise of this. I really enjoy the characters in general. Iku is like sometimes gets on my nerves, but like all of the characters around her like make it so that even when she's a little bit unbearable, the plot and those other characters are great, so I can deal with it. I will say that like there are some issues here. It's a little bit sexist because she is the first woman on the defense task force. Sexism, like gender norms are like kind of enforced a little bit more. Well, not enforced, but like expected. It's one of those really weird situations where she's definitely the first woman on the defense task force, and people are like, oh, you're a girl and like you probably can't do this, but also like sort of like never really question her. It's or sort of generally don't question her. Like it's very, very strange because they're like, oh yeah, you as can do it, but like we wouldn't expect most women to be able to keep up. It's a little strange. How it's handled is like just this side of what I can handle, but like it does come up on occasion. There is this romance that has really not great power dynamics that are never looked into, which like I kind of understand that they would never go into those power dynamics because like it's intended for teenage girls, so they're not really doing that. It's a mess. But I did really enjoy watching Iku grow as a character, and I really love what this has to say about freedoms and what it takes to keep those freedoms, which like honestly is like very very relevant for as of late. But like freedom, what it takes to keep those freedoms, as well as what it has to say about censorship. And so it's still like it's very dated. Not everybody is going to be able to get on with it, but I really, really enjoy it. For the first 14 volumes, I rated all of them between 3.5 and 4.25 stars. The last volume, volume 15, I did rate 5 stars because like it's a culmination of everything that I want, and so it was really great. But yeah, 15 volumes of manga this month. It was great. But that is it. Those are all the things that I read this month. If you have any thoughts or feelings about anything that I talked about, please leave me a comment down below. But that is all I have. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to. And until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!